All right, welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk about the spotlight object. Let's go ahead and bring that into the scene and talk about what the heck this thing does. So by default, you can see it just kind of pops in here. There's the spotlight. And if we just click render, you're going to see it's kind of lighting our little object here, and it's casting a shadow. The spotlight and the softbox are broken up a little bit differently than some of the other objects. So let me show you here, just in case you're confused. The spotlight itself collapses up into this null just called spotlight. And if you move this whole thing, the whole rig is going to move. If you want to move the actual light, you have to twirl this down and just select spotlight move. And this is going to allow you to grab onto the handle and then move the spotlight more traditionally. And you can see it's actually following the text. And what it's actually following is this light target. And the light target kind of tells that light where to aim. By default, it's in the middle of the scene. So whenever you move the object, it's just going to kind of follow the light target. So keep that in mind. Also, on the spotlight move is all your controls. So if you just click on spotlight controls over here in your kind of object modes and stuff like that over here, you're going to see it. All your options pop up, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So let's just move this up and kind of zoom in, and I'm just going to pull down here just so we could see a little bit more what's going on. When I hit render, you're going to see, again, we have just this basic spotlight, hard shadow. It's exactly what we kind of expect from a spotlight. Obviously, the brightness, let's go all the way up. The brightness makes it brighter and dimmer. And if you really want to crank up the brightness, you could use the brightness multiplier. This really is useful for global illumination, where it really takes sometimes a lot of cranking to get things bright. And we'll talk more about that in the global illumination tutorials. The next setting is, other than brightness multiplier, is rotation. So if you just want to rotate around on its axis, you could use this. And this is nice if you kind of have one light positioned. I use this all the time. If you have one light positioned, select the whole light, go back into the spotlight move, and then rotate it. And you're going to kind of start to be able to build a rig really quickly of kind of two different lights and stuff like that. In fact, if you just kind of tint the other light a different color, you start to get these kind of more realistic effects. So that's what I usually use rotation for. Now, gradient. The gradient will basically, right now we have kind of this hard cutoff on the gradient, which is just giving us this kind of hard spotlight effect. If you wanted to affect that at all, what you could do is grab some of these different color picker things on the inside. And now when we hit render, you're going to see that our brightness is kind of brighter in the middle, and it gets dimmer as it goes out. And we can actually really even affect this more and say we really want this to dim way down. So this, you could see, is giving us maybe a little bit more realistic spotlight effect. So you could play around with the gradient. I'm just going to undo that, go back to the basics where we were. I don't touch this much in the spotlight. It's there for kind of flexibility. I usually use the gradient more in the soft boxes, but it's there in case you need it. And sometimes we do. So light color, we've kind of already touched on a bit, but again, you just pick the light color. It'll tint the light. It'll tint the reflection. It'll also tint the light coming off of it. So I rarely use it that dramatically. Although with spotlights, you can get away with a lot of crazy colors because they're so small, especially with GI. Especially if you're going for like a theatrical look, kind of a stage spotlight look, you can really crank up the colors and get some cool stuff going on there. I'm going to go back to white. And then you can see when we adjust the size that the whole kind of light goes up and down. So it adjusts the size of our actual light, but also adjusts the size of our reflection and everything else. So if you need a bigger spotlight, especially in global illumination, you can crank that up. Next, we have our shadow options, which are identical to our softbox options, things like that. And so just quickly, we'll go through them. By default, we have a hard shadow, and that is usually kind of what a spotlight gives off, is a really hard shadow. You could turn the shadow off, say none. You can go to soft shadow, which will just soften our edges just a bit. You can see it's not quite as harsh of a shadow. And then we can go to area shadow, which is a more realistic look. You can see area shadow kind of is like harder at the bottom and softer at the top, just like a real shadow is. But you can also see it took longer to render, and this is always the kind of problem, I guess, with area shadows. They always look better, but they always take longer to render, so keep that in mind. If you do use area shadows, you have some options, including the area shadow accuracy and the area shadow quality, which will kind of adjust the render settings. And again, I've gone through these before, but if I just turn these down, you're going to see the area shadows will render quickly, but it starts to get a little grainy on the corners here. So there's always the balance between longer rendering and making it look better, and that's what these accuracy and quality does. If you're more interested in what these do, please check out some of the other tutorials included, including the overhead softbox, where I talk a little bit more about it. Frankly, with a spotlight, I usually keep it on hard. Spotlights kind of usually give off a hard shadow. Sometimes you'll use area if you're doing it with, like, for a sunlight or something like that, but I usually have it either on off or on hard. The shadow color, you can see we could pick a different shadow color for that. Bright red is not the way to go, but if you want to pick something like just a little bit off color, like an off blue, you could start to get kind of a more realistic shadow, especially if things in your scene are these colors. If you have blue items in your scene, you want to maybe pick blue shadows. It's just kind of the way physics works. The light bounces off of the colors and then makes the shadows that color. In fact, if you ever seen Bug's Life, you'll notice all the shadows in Bug's Life are green because they're surrounded by grass the whole dang movie. So just a little something there. So if you're making Bug's Life Part 4, make your shadows a little bit green, just a bit, and you're going to start to be a little bit more realistic. The light fall off, adjust how far the light travels from the light. By default, it's kind of in this like kind of infinity mode. It's not quite infinity, but it's far. It goes a long way. What we want to do is make it a little bit more realistic. Sorry, we go down. We could set it to linear, which is starting to get more realistic. You can see now, let me zoom in just so we can see that better. I'm actually going to move the light closer. So now we're starting to get a little bit more realistic. This is brighter than this, and it kind of falls off, which is a lot more realistic. In fact, the most realistic is inverse square. But you can see there's really a big difference between what's close to the light and how it drifts away. So you have to kind of be careful with your brightness with inverse square. But that is technically the most realistic. So I usually use linear or inverse square. So you can play around with those. The other ones are here just because some people use the other ones. I rarely ever use those, but they're there if you need them. I'm going to set that back to linear and show you that this next setting does the radius of the decay. So if you want it only to go a certain distance, you can actually adjust that. So right now the light kind of stops right at the edge of the text. And if I crank up the radius decay, it's going to kind of start bright and then it's going to go further. So you can see that this will kind of adjust how far your light goes. I'm going to shut that back off, go to none. And in the visibility options here, we have the traditional ones. We have seen by camera, so we could shut that off. If we turn that off, then the light actually disappears and only the effect stays. Sometimes you just want to get the lights out of the render, let's say. So that's there. The spotlight assembly visibility, that just turns on and off the actual little casing here. So if that's bothering you, if you want to actually see the other side of this light there, you could turn that off. Target mode allows us to basically have, when we move the spotlight around, it's following that target. But sometimes we just want to be able to rotate this freely. You can see if I grab the rotation tool, it's not working. And let's say I wanted to aim this straight up in the air and I didn't want to bother with this light target. You can actually just unlink it from the light target by unchecking that box. So you can say target mode off. And now when you grab the rotation, it's kind of a freewheeling light. And you could just move it left and right and kind of up and down. And just you have free reign to move it and aim it wherever you want. So that's what target mode does. And as soon as you click it back on and just kind of touch the light there, it pops back into target mode, where then it's kind of following the light target again. Standard light on is where we control the normal lighting. So right now we're using traditional lights built into Cinema 4D. And what you want to do is, this is kind of my rule. If you're using global illumination, you want to shut this off, because global illumination is only concerned about how bright this little area is, and not necessarily how far the light travels and those kind of things. Global illumination takes care of it all, so you can actually shut off the standard light when you're doing that. Or sometimes you just want to use it kind of as a reflection. You could just turn off the standard light. And then now we just have our basic default light that's on. And then it's not really projecting any light like it was before. And again, we go through a lot of these specific settings. These are usually for GI and stuff like that. So prepare to see more of this, especially in the GI tutorials. The GI light is also a thing that is not going to be too helpful right now because we're not using GI. But if you're using GI and you just want to use the spotlight as a reflection or something in GI and you don't want it to actually produce bright light, then you could shut that off. So those are the options for the spotlight. Please play around, and please, when you're done, go ahead and click on another tutorial for some of the other rigs and other scenes that are included in the Grayscale Gorilla Light Kit Pro. I appreciate it again for getting this, and hope to see you guys in another tutorial where I'll describe more of this stuff. Thanks again, guys.